Well, Easter is our subject today, and Easter marks the beginning of Christianity and the astounding news that Jesus rose from the dead. So, for a fresh 21st century look at what that means, I want to introduce a very special context panel. Joining us is Dr. Sylvia Keesmaat. She is a New Testament scholar, and Tyler Wigg Stevenson, an evangelical author and pastor, and Oriana Bertucci, who leads Catholic Campus Ministry at Ryerson University. You're actually a campus minister.
I am.
Great. Okay, so Oriana's been sitting with us earlier on the program, so I want to turn to Professor. Let's start with you. There are billions of people celebrating Easter. What, though, did actually the very first Christians believe had caused Easter, and what was it?
Well, the first thing is that the very first Christians didn't believe that Jesus had risen from the dead.
Really?
They were expecting resurrection to be a social, political, communal thing that would happen when God's kingdom came and was established on earth. So the idea that one guy had risen from the dead was just absurd. How could this have happened? So when the women came back to the disciples and said, "He's gone and we've seen him, he's risen from the dead," the disciples thought, the Bible tells us, that it was an idle tale, that they were just making something up. So at very first, they didn't believe it.
I've always loved as a journalist that there's so many eyewitness records of this. This has hundreds of people. Jesus took the time to show himself physically to hundreds of people. But how reliable, as a scholar, how reliable are these eyewitness accounts of Jesus, those 2,000 years ago?
Let me put it this way. We have more reliable evidence and more ancient evidence about Jesus rising from the dead than we have about some of the Caesars. So it's incredibly reliable
There's more accounts written.
There's more accounts written, and there's more eyewitness accounts that are written about. And some of the accounts we have about ancient Roman history, it's the third or fourth hand accounts. It's further away. So it's very reliable.
Okay, so Tyler, you find that it's very hard for people to believe. Why do you think it is so hard for them to believe, yes, this is true? A man named Jesus, God in the flesh, rose from the dead.
Well, I think it's as hard to believe for people back then as it is now, that because dead men don't rise. I mean, this is a basic fact of existence that doesn't surprise anybody. Once you're dead and gone, you're dead and gone. And so I think it was a challenge for people back then. It was a challenge for people today. It's maybe more of a challenge for people today in a modern scientific era. But beyond that, I think, beyond the simple sort of fact of dead men don't get up, I also think what it says about God is hard for people to believe. It's hard for people to believe in a God that would give the divine self in love for humanity. And I think it's much easier to believe in other things that we feel like we can see and touch. Power, pleasure, money, goods, all the things that we could organize a life around. It's much easier to believe in those things. And so I think the resurrection challenges us on both fronts. That a dead man could rise up, and then what that actually says about the world we live in and the kind of people we can be.
Okay, it's the so what question. What does that mean about that? We're going to touch back on that again, but Oriana, I want to go to you as a campus minister. Does the truth of Jesus rising from the dead and what it means God leaving his presence in the person of Jesus, does this impact students? How does it?
I think Tyler's right. I think it is hard to believe when we're surrounded by so many messages in the media. But I think students have a desire for more. And once they've met Jesus, once they've had that personal encounter, there's a joy and a desire to share that with other people. It's almost as though it's contagious, and you can't help but just share that message with other people, with other students, with your family, with your friends.
Okay, so Sylvia, what good news does get set in motion now because of this? Because Jesus has risen from the dead?
Well, the good news that gets set in motion is that all of creation has been redeemed. Because Jesus rose in the flesh from the dead, the Bible talks about him as the first fruits, and that means that all of us will be resurrected from the dead to live in the new heaven and the new earth. So when the Bible talks about resurrection, it talks about creation waiting with eager longing for people to be resurrected, to continue their role as stewards of creation.
And so how does that make
stewards
a
of the
difference
earth.
in my life now?
Well, just like the whole arc of the biblical story is this story where things get really dark, where death enters the story. And in those places, the Bible tells us, in those places God is present, right? Resurrection is the result of crucifixion, of Jesus dying the most horrible death possible. So I think all of us have found ourselves in those places of deep darkness, and we see our world as this place where sometimes the darkness is hard to get out of. And resurrection tells us this is not the end of the story.
not the end.
God is going to do something new.
Okay, Pastor Tyler, I hate to keep pointing at you as the fellow who understands the skeptic voice in this, but you wrestle with that, and I think people are also find it very difficult that they need to be forgiven, and that really you can't embrace this message of new life coming into yourself unless you realize you've got stuff that you have to be forgiven.
Yeah.
Is that true universally of each and every one of us?
Well, I don't know. I actually think that's something that people understand at a pretty basic level. I mean, I think everyone can understand some facts of the human condition, namely that we all miss the mark with each other and how we treat each other, and that at the end of the day, all of us are going to die. There's no one who contests these things. And Christianity is one response, one message in the face of this. There are lots of ways to deal with the reality, the fact that we're all going to die, the fact that we're bad and mean to each other. Christianity's answer is that God gave God's self in the person of Jesus, and that God offers us forgiveness for all the ways we've missed the mark. And God does this by God taking on human flesh, becoming the man Jesus, who is then himself uniquely faithful to God, so that Jesus is himself a man of faith. And in the resurrection, we're invited into that relationship of faith, of God being faithful to humanity, and humanity in the person of Jesus being faithful to God. The forgiveness comes from our recognition that we can't earn our way into the gift that's been given to us. We just understand ourselves as forgiven. And then as Paul's letters talk about it, we become ambassadors of that forgiveness, because once I, who have done so many wrong things and do so many wrong things today, will do after I leave here, once I recognize myself as forgiven, how can I then hold my brothers and sisters, my friends and neighbors? How can I, bear a grudge against them?
It tells us that the practices of Easter get pretty close. How have you found Easter to be meaningful for you, Oriana?
I think for me, Easter is a time of hope, a time of joy, a changing of seasons, the new life, the new beginning that comes with resurrection. It's an opportunity to gather with your friends, with your family after the 40 days of Lent, a time of introspection and reflection, and to celebrate new life, whether it's spring finally arriving, whether it's a reconciliation with a family member or a friend. It's a cause of joy that lasts throughout the Easter season.
Excellent. Sylvia, how about for you? How do you keep Easter meaningful in your life and practice?
Well, Easter is the one part of the church year where we live the biblical story in real time. So we start the week before with Palm Sunday, and we actually walk through the events of the end of Jesus' life, Good Friday to Easter. And so participating in that with a community of faith is really important for me, for keeping Easter. And saying at the vigil, when we all proclaim, He is risen, and the candles get lit in the dark, and people shake their bells, and we're all, this sense that we all believe this to be true, that new life will come and God will bring it, and has brought it. That's a good way to me to keep Easter.
Well, Tyler, you get to put the bow on all of this. How are you going to keep Easter meaningful for you?
It's meaningful when you celebrate it in community. There are some truths that you can believe in. I believe that the lake is south of Toronto because I can walk down and see it. But other truths need to be lived to be believed. And so unless you're in a community of people that's celebrating this, you're really not going to understand the spirit, the animating spirit that lets Christians say with 100% conviction, no fingers crossed behind our backs, that our Lord is risen, and experience that reality. It happens in the body that's waiting on His coming.
Well, thank you all for being part of helping us understand that. And we hope you at home could feel that community of the truth of Easter. But when we return, we're going to focus on putting the happy into happy Easter. Thank you. That was great. Great. Excellent. Easter is the perfect time to remind ourselves that the greatest story ever told has the greatest ending ever written. An ending that promises deliverance from death. An eternity with God is a place more joyful than any of us can imagine. But best of all, it's a true story, and that's the headline. And that's why it's vital not to lose that message in the wave of popularity surrounding a remarkable media-adored church leader like Pope Francis, as we looked at earlier in the program, or to divert our attention from our need to accept the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the sacrifice he made for you and for me and for the forgiveness of our sins. The gift of life, those are worth our worship, our adoration. And Pope Francis would be the first to say so. For all of us, I'm Lorna Duick. Thanks for watching and have a great Easter. Join us next week as we explore life beyond the headlines.